good for business. Businesses should be focusing on what they do well, which is their core services, not spending so much time and complexity on just being able to pay their employees correctly. So what I've been hearing is that the changes have been widely received by the business community because they're finally seeing the simplicity that they've been asking for years. But secondly, I know that there'll be many workers around the country who will be benefiting under the system, predominantly working women who've returned from parental leave, who will no longer have to weigh up whether or not they hold off taking annual leave because they won't financially go backwards for a day of leave. And I think that's a fairness in the system that this government is finally correcting.
How much money do you reckon this is going to save?
Well, look, it's really actually hard to say that because I would wish I could give you a number. The difficulty is the government doesn't hold individual employment agreements from across all of different various industries and businesses. But what I would say is that I would expect it to be cost neutral on average. In some instances, businesses will be better off, and in some instances, workers will be better off. But those are the trade-offs of the system that we've had to make as a government so that on average, we can move on from the Holidays Act for a simpler system overall.
Yeah, can you speak to the complexities of the current system? What is the difference between the status quo now and going into the future in terms of that complexity?
Well, for most workers, they won't notice any difference, but for a business owner and a manager, they'll notice a huge difference in the simplicity of calculating correctly whether or not their employees get paid right for the right days they take off for leave. That's going to be a huge benefit for anybody who wants to do the right thing and follow the law. The easiest change to articulate is that from day one, all workers will be entitled to accrue annual leave and sick leave and also be able to have access to bereavement leave and family violence leave. Currently, employees are only entitled to annual leave after working for 12 full months. Employees are only entitled to sick leave after working for 6 full months and after 6 months for bereavement leave and family violence leave. This makes it really clear. From the first day of work, you get paid or you earn leave for the hours you actually work.
You have promised to clean up the Holidays Act coming into office. Were you surprised at just how messy it is and how technical all of the arrangements are?
Oh yeah, this has been a behemoth of work. I'm not surprised that people have been paying their staff incorrectly, and even the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, who overlooked the system, have been paying their staff incorrectly. Because the laws have become so tangled and complex, I believed it was the right thing to do to start again so that we're not fixing a broken system, but we're scrapping it and starting from fresh. Every employee will earn from the first day of work, and every calculation has intentionally been designed to make it simple for a payroll system to know what the calculations are, so every employee gets paid correctly.
You seem to genuinely want consensus and an enduring change so that doesn't flip-flop between governments. What work did you do behind the scenes to consult opposition parties on the changes that you're proposing?
So the work that we've done to date is when I first became Minister of Workplace Relations, I worked to take on all of the changes that the Labor government had worked on for the past 5 years. We didn't scrap it. We tried our best with the work that the task force, which had the unions and business working behind the scenes on. We drafted that legislation and put it out for consultation. That gave us a really good insight as to what businesses and unions were interested in. Unfortunately, the feedback that came back from that draft bill said, don't do it. This could be worse than what we've currently got, which is why I thought it would be more important to start again and not use a working group, but actually go for the proposed idea of simplicity first. That means from now, I'll be hoping to work with Labor on what those changes could look like to be enduring, but I've intentionally tried to strike a balance between the rights and interests of employers and workers. So you'll see that in some instances workers will benefit, and in some instances employees will benefit. So this is not the case that the government has come in and made it, a 100% massive win for business.
Why is
We've,
it important
sorry,
to work
can I
with-
just finish? We've just seen Labor send out an attack PR focusing on the sick leave reductions for some workers. Does it disappoint you that that's their initial response?
Yeah, look, it does disappoint me because ultimately this is about a balance of fairness across different worker and employer obligations and rights. What I've heard really loud and clear is that when Labor came in and increased the sick leave entitlements to 10 days for all workers, no matter how long they worked for, there were a number of companies that found that very difficult, especially companies that hire a lot of part-time employees, people in retail or students, for example. I have had feedback that having pro-rata sick leave does decrease that leave liability and makes it more of an opportunity for people to hire people in part-time roles because that leave liability balance is no longer hanging there.
Even the unions are even a little bit supportive of this. It's quite surprising to see that Labor, I know, right? Is it surprising to see Labor coming out, as Amelia was saying, and I mean, would you have expected something different from them?
Well, look, the one thing I'll suggest is I do want to work across the scenes on this one. It's been very important for me that we haven't muddied the waters with, too many cooks spoiling the broth. We have had a clear, simple policy development framework, but I will be open to sitting down with Labor, working through what their concerns are, because ultimately it's good for business to have a law that will be enduring and that won't become a political football that will go in and out over changes over many years. I did try and work with what Labor had originally intended to be the law. We put that one out for consultation, not to lose the time and resources that had gone into it, but the feedback that came back was it was far too complicated because it had tried to please too many people all at the same time. We have made intentional trade-offs between different types of policy decisions throughout, so in some cases employees benefit and in some cases employers benefit, but on average it is the best solution for a fair and simple law change.
In that pursuit of genuine consensus, what dead rats have you had to swallow as an act? You not particularly like about it?
Well, look, there's not so much that I feel like I've had to swallow because I've been putting myself aside. I have not come into this thinking I have to do what is an ideologically consistent or pure idea. It's looking at the interests of businesses and workers. This is not about myself as a person, but it's about what is good for the country. Businesses thrive when they have certainty. But we also know that the current cost to businesses and the administrative cost of this law is too high. It's too wrong and it's gone on for too long, which is why we need to simplify and get this law change done. Where there have been some intentional changes has been for that leave compensation payment system. That current payout would be at 12.5%, which is higher than the pay-as-you-go system now, which is 8%. The thinking behind that is I didn't wish to incentivise employees to move from stable work into a cheaper casual workforce, but I also didn't want to put the onus too high on an employer that they no longer wanted to employ casual staff either. So I've tried to find the balance between the rights and interests of those two groups in that
Does this have any
example.
bearing on the settlements that are still underway?
No, current settlements will still remain. I want to make it really clear that there is no clean slate. For people who have been underpaid, they do deserve to have their payments rectified and to be remediated for that. I know that there might be some businesses out there who would hope that we wipe that slate clean. But once again, this is about balancing those interests of the workers and the businesses, because it's also not fair for a worker who's been underpaid not to get that remediation. But we're working through the transitional period now of what that remediation would look like so that we get it right for that balance of interests.
What's the rollout costs for business to become compliant with this new payroll systems and things like that? And that's the first part. And also, why is it going to take the Ministry of Education 10 years to roll this out in their system? Like, what is wrong with it? It's not going to be until 2036 until they'll do this.
So to your first question, look, that will really come down to the payroll providers that want to compete in this space. Even just talking to Datacom today, they're already very interested in how they can satisfy their existing clientele with changes to their own back end of their own payroll software provision. And I suspect that will be the same for a lot of payroll clients across the country, and even potentially internationally entering our border, because it will be a much clearer, simpler type of solution that they can use. Bearing in mind, we've been an anomaly around the world for having 4-week or weeks-based entitlements. Most countries do use an accrual system of some kind, and so we could see more companies enter the market. But I wouldn't expect that to be too much of an additional cost for people whose payroll companies want to keep them. But to your second question then, that's really a question for the Minister of Education and the Ministry for Education. I have acted on the advice and feedback I've received from the Ministry of Education that because of their historic issues with NovaPay in the past and incorrect payments, as well as being one of the largest employers in the country with a variety of historic payroll systems, that it's a very complicated situation, especially with collective agreements on top of that as well. However, I also acknowledge there are a range of businesses around the country who do have complicated employment relations themselves, but it really does come down to a question to the Minister of Education why it would take them that long.
Isn't health our biggest employer in New Zealand, and how come they're able to get up to speed faster than the Ministry of Education? And they work nights, they have far more complicated arrangements in the health sector than in education, surely.
Yeah, and like I say, the feedback that I've received from health is that they would be able to comply, but it really is a question for the Ministry of Education why they believe it would take them that long.
And just while we're on this, do you have any costs for how much you're expecting it? What the costs are going to be for the public sector to be able to comply and change their payroll systems over?
Yeah, once again, I would love to have a specific number for you, but I don't have that because of the collective agreements that are in place. While we may see simplicity in the form of the legislative change and the transition over to different payroll systems or updated payroll systems, those would become part of the collective agreement bargaining process. So whether or not that adds complexity and increases costs or lowers them really comes down to the overall bargaining that would happen in future. And I can't see into a crystal ball to know what would end up happening for the overall public sector, but I would expect it on balance for what we have currently for it to be cost neutral.
When you were talking about workers being able to take hours as opposed to days of holidays, you mentioned the example of being able to take a few hours to go to a medical appointment. Do you think that workers should be using annual leave to do that type of thing? And is your idea is that for part-time workers, maybe that would make up for sick leave they're losing?
Well, look, I think this is adding a level of flexibility that I know a lot of workers would like in the system. Not necessarily wanting to take a whole day off of annual leave to get a whole bunch of life admin done, medical appointments, important things with their children. Being able to take the time that you actually need rather than more than is necessary would be a huge win for workers.
So in theory, would you be able to take a couple of hours of annual leave to go get a haircut?
Well, I guess in theory, if that's what you wanted to spend your annual leave on, but that might be best actually kept to your weekend when the hairdressers are already open. But ultimately, annual leave is there for any employee to use with the permission of their employer for the specific days that they would like to take off. But it would once again come down to that relationship between an employee and an employer. And if that's what you'd like to spend your time off, go for gold. I know I'd prefer to go to Fiji or something.
And one of the other technical questions you had in there was, which I don't think you've conferred with Tracy over yet, but was that annual leave for people on parental leave will be paid out on the final day of employment. So does that mean in theory that someone could be on parental leave for 12 months and then at the end of that 12 months not return to work but then be paid out another 4 weeks of annual leave at their sort of salaried amount? And is that fair to businesses if they have to then pay for 4 weeks of annual leave for someone who's not been there for a year?
Yeah, you are right. That could be a theoretical possibility. I know that for a lot of women, they do want to return to work, but in some circumstances, it might be that something has happened during their pregnancy, or they have a child that needs them not to be at work. That is a genuine difficulty of having a child, and they may not wish to return to work. That was one of the trade-offs that we made in the system, that for those types of employees, yes, they would benefit if they left their employment very soon after parental leave. However, it's only around 1% of workers who are on parental leave at any time, versus the win for business in around 20% of the workforce who would now be on prorated sick leave. So those are the balances that I've attempted to strike, where some workers may benefit and some employers may benefit.
Why does salaried people on salaries who do extra hours, why don't they get the LCP like unsalaried people?
Is this a specific pledge?
Nothing personal.
Okay, nothing personal. Well, look, that comes down to the individual contracts that people have signed. In some circumstances, you'd have salaried workers who, say, for example, might earn $80,000 a year, but their contract also says that it's part of the agreement that they also work any other additional hours as part of that contract, which means that the LCP or monetary compensation doesn't come into it. This would only be for cases where you've got really clear-cut, maybe someone has taken sick leave, and the employer now needs another worker to step in and take on another shift. That would be considered additional hours that would then be paid out with monetary compensation at the time it was taken, rather than being factored into all of their overall pay for when they take leave. It makes the laws so much simpler.
And just on the commissioned and bonuses stuff, will this shaft them? Are they being shafted by this, or is this going to discourage employers from offering bonuses and commissions in lieu of a good?
Received any advice about that?
I don't think that would be one of the arrangements here, because remember, as part of all of these changes, it does actually come down to the employer having conversations with each employee about what the changes will mean for them. It is not the case that I'm wanting people to go backwards, but it would be the case that that employee could say to their employer, this is no longer a good deal for me, that's not something I can sign.
Have you done the
Okay,
unthinkable
last
here?
questions, guys.
Like the NACT party minister, the unions can't really find anything to complain about. Everyone's kind of on the same page. Like, do you notch that up as a huge win?
Look, I'm not seeing this as a win for myself. I'm seeing this as a win for the country. We have had decades of complicated laws. It is really important that businesses can get on and be productive and not waste their money and time on admin costs. So that's a great win for ACT, but it's just a win across the board. if all of the political parties can come to the table and get on board with this, this means businesses and workers will have certainty for decades to come. And that can only be good for investment into our country.
It's a little bit of a personal win.
I did
I'm
take
just
on a
joshing
challenge,
you.
but I really have to also thank all my officials and my team behind the scenes who have done exceptional work and really hard technical work to make sure it will work. Yes, and also there's another woman there called Anna, who was a lot shyer, but she's worked on this for 5 years, and so we thank her for that too.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, mate.
All right.